Yesterday I got married, and in the evening, after everything was over, my father finally showed up. We exchanged words that made him cry, and now I'm wrestling with a mix of emotions about the whole situation. Let me give you some context. My name is Sarah, and I work as a medical device sales representative. 5 months ago, my fiancé and I got engaged. We decided to have an intimate backyard wedding, keeping it small and personal with just our closest family and friends. The date was especially meaningful, our fourth anniversary together. It wasn't just about keeping things simple. As someone who spends her days helping hospitals acquire life-saving equipment, I understand the value of substance over show. We had already booked decorators and caterers, which is why I couldn't, and honestly didn't want to, entertain my father's bizarre request to postpone everything. The reason for his request? My golden child brother Michael, a vice president at a global investment bank in London, was in town and had organized a camping trip for the same weekend. I wish I was making this up, but reality sometimes surpasses fiction. 1 week before the wedding. Last week, my father James called. He started with what he probably thought was a convincing story about a medical emergency preventing him from attending my wedding. The irony wasn't lost on me. Working in the medical field, I knew exactly how flimsy his excuse was. After some pressing, he finally admitted the truth. He had agreed to go on a surprise camping trip that Michael had planned, which happened to coincide with my wedding date. "Sarah, honey, it's just that Michael's only here for a couple of weeks each year," he explained, his voice taking on that familiar apologetic tone that always preceded choosing my brother over me. "Can't you understand how important this is?" "Dad, this is my wedding day," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "And we chose this date specifically because it's our anniversary." "But sweetheart, it's such a small wedding anyway," he countered, as if the size of the celebration somehow diminished its importance. "Just talk to the vendors, move things around a bit. It shouldn't be too complicated." The conversation continued, but I already knew how it would end. I could hear it in his voice. The decision was already made. The successful real estate developer James Miller had once again chosen his investment banker son over his medical sales representative daughter. The family history. This preference wasn't new. Michael, 3 years my senior, had always been the star of the family. While I worked my way through State University and built a career helping hospitals acquire life-saving equipment, Michael attended prestigious schools and climbed the corporate ladder at a global investment bank. Our father never missed an opportunity to bring up Michael's latest achievement, while my contributions to literally saving lives through medical equipment sales barely warranted a mention at family dinners. Michael wasn't just successful, he was insufferable about it. His ego had been inflated by years of preferential treatment, and he carried himself like he was God's gift to the financial world. He'd often belittle my career choice, suggesting that anyone could sell medical equipment. The irony that his job essentially involved moving money around, while mine helped save lives, was apparently lost on him. Our family dynamics took a sharp turn when our parents divorced during my middle school years. The catalyst was my mother Elizabeth's affair with an old college friend. Though looking back, the signs of their failing marriage had been there all along. Dad's drinking had increased, their fights had become more frequent, and the silences between them had grown longer and heavier. Reflecting on the past, the divorce itself was messy, but what came after was worse. While both parents maintained shared custody, Michael completely shut our mother out. I made a different choice. Despite Dad's obvious disapproval, I maintained a relationship with Mom and my stepfather David, a pediatrician at the local hospital. David's dedication to his young patients actually inspired me to pursue my current career in medical device sales. I saw how the right equipment could make a difference in a child's life, and I wanted to be part of that process. Of course, Michael dismissed this as settling for less, and Dad never bothered to understand. Mom's passing from cancer 6 years ago changed everything, or at least, I thought it had. During her final days in the hospital, I spent every possible moment by her side. The equipment monitoring her vital signs was similar to what I helped hospitals acquire, a bitter irony that wasn't lost on me. Michael managed a few brief visits, which seemed to give Mom some peace. After her death, my relationship with Dad started to improve, or so I believed. Recent events. David remained in our lives even after Mom's passing, checking in regularly and offering both medical and personal advice. Michael took a position in London, coming back only for a few weeks each year to visit Dad. These visits always reminded me of my secondary status in the family hierarchy. Dad would cancel our plans without hesitation if Michael was in town. Still, things had been getting better between Dad and me. He'd acknowledged his past favoritism and apologized for his cold treatment after the divorce. That's why I asked him to walk me down the aisle. I truly believed we'd turned a corner. His choice of a camping trip over my wedding proved how wrong I'd been. The wedding decision. After that devastating phone call with Dad, I made a decision that was both vindictive and liberating. I called David, who had already been invited to the wedding. Through tears of frustration and anger, I asked him to walk me down the aisle. "Sarah, are you sure about this?" David's voice carried his characteristic thoughtful concern. "You know I'd be honored, but I want you to be certain it's what you really want." My voice was stronger than I expected when I replied, "You've been more present in my life than Dad has. You inspired my career choice. You were there through Mom's illness." "Yes, I'm sure." David agreed after some consideration. My fiance supported my decision, which was all the validation I needed. For the week leading up to the wedding, Dad barely communicated, too busy with Michael, I presumed, which only reinforced that I'd made the right choice. Wedding day. Yesterday, I finally got married. As I prepared for the ceremony, part of me still hoped for a miracle, that Dad would show up and realize his mistake. But as the time approached, it was David who stood beside me, ready to walk me down the aisle. I had my cousin take a picture of that moment on my phone and send it to Dad. I wanted him to see what he'd missed, what he'd chosen to give up. The immediate silence that followed was deafening, but I was too busy with the wedding celebration to dwell on it. Evening confrontation. Around 8 p.m., as guests were starting to leave, Dad appeared with Michael in tow. They looked exhausted, as if they'd rushed back from their precious camping trip. Dad's face showed signs of distress I'd never seen before. "Sarah," his voice cracked as he spoke, "I'm so sorry. I didn't take your wedding seriously enough. But I'm here now, and I want to make it right. We could have another ceremony tomorrow, just us. I need to walk my little girl down the aisle." I studied his face, noting the desperation in his eyes. "Would you have come back this quickly if I hadn't asked David to walk me down the aisle?" "Be honest, Dad." His hesitation told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about me. It was about his pride, about being replaced by David. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. The confrontation continues. "You've disappointed me, Dad," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm not having another ceremony just to soothe your ego. You had your chance, and you chose a camping trip over your daughter's wedding day." He broke down then, tears streaming down his face. "Please, Sarah, forgive me. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't think you'd actually go through with the wedding without me." "That's exactly the problem," I replied, feeling a strange mix of sadness and determination. "You never think about how your choices affect me. You never have. I want you to leave now. I want to enjoy what's left of my wedding day. This seemed to spark something in him. Heartless, he said, his voice rising. You can't treat me like this over one mistake. The word mistake ignited years of suppressed feelings. One mistake. My voice trembled with emotion. My entire life has been filled with your mistakes, Dad. Every time you chose Michael over me. Every time you dismissed my career because it wasn't as prestigious as his. Every time you made me feel less important because I wasn't bringing in investment banking money. At least David sees me for who I am. He understands that helping hospitals get life-saving equipment matters more than moving money around in London. The aftermath. I walked away while he was still crying, heading back into the house. When I looked out later, both he and Michael were gone, leaving behind an emotional wreckage that I'm still trying to process. First morning as a married woman. Now sitting here the morning after my wedding, I've had time to think. The guilt about making my father cry initially weighed heavily on my mind. But as I reflect on everything, I realize something important. I have nothing to apologize for. All my life, I've made excuses for him. I've accepted being second best to Michael. I've smiled through the subtle digs about my career choice, about maintaining a relationship with Mom and David. I've endured the last-minute cancellations whenever Michael was in town. But asking me to reschedule my wedding for a camping trip? That was the final straw. You know what? I said to my husband over breakfast. I don't regret having David walk me down the aisle. He earned that right through years of actual support and understanding. Days after the wedding. My father has been trying to contact me daily since the wedding. His name appears on my phone screen regularly, but I haven't answered. The text messages pile up, unread. I'm leaving for my honeymoon in a few days, and right now, I want to focus on the joy of being newly married rather than family drama. Today, I finally decided to read his messages. They all carried variations of the same theme: profound regret and requests for another chance. One message particularly caught my attention. Sarah, as your only surviving biological parent, I know I failed you repeatedly. I've always favored Michael, and that was wrong. I understand now how much I've hurt you. Please give me one more chance to be the father you deserve. The words stirred something in me, but I maintained my resolve. I called him back, keeping my voice professional, the same tone I use when dealing with difficult clients. Dad, I'm calling to let you know I'm going on my honeymoon, I said firmly. I've read your messages, and I know you're sorry. But I need you to stop calling and texting for a while. Your constant apologizing isn't changing what happened. It's just keeping the wound fresh. When I'm ready to talk, I'll reach out. Until then, please respect my space. A surprise call. During our honeymoon, I received an unexpected call from an unknown number. It was Michael, attempting to lecture me about family values from his privileged perch in London. You can't run away from family, Sarah, he declared with his typical condescension. Dad's miserable, and my visit was ruined because of your behavior. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're punishing Dad for recognizing my superior achievements. I felt a familiar surge of anger, but this time it was different. Years of selling medical equipment had taught me how to handle difficult people professionally. Michael, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. You sound exactly like what you are. An emotionally stunted man who's never grown beyond being Daddy's golden boy. I'm not jealous of you. I actually feel sorry for you. While you're moving numbers around in spreadsheets, I'm helping hospitals save lives. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a honeymoon to enjoy. I hung up before he could respond, feeling a sense of satisfaction I hadn't experienced in any of our previous confrontations. After the honeymoon. After returning from my honeymoon, my husband and I spent a few days readjusting to normal life before returning to work. As I dove back into my medical equipment sales role, meeting with hospital administrators, and discussing life-saving technologies, I realized it was time to address the situation with my father. The confrontation. After work, I drove to his house. He seemed surprised to see me at his door. Michael was still there, but I barely acknowledged his presence. I requested to speak with Dad privately, knowing Michael would only interrupt with his self-righteous commentary. "Dad," I began, settling into the familiar living room where so many family dramas had unfolded. "I'm disappointed. These past few years, I thought things were getting better between us. That's why I asked you to walk me down the aisle. But when you suggested rescheduling my wedding for Michael's camping trip, you showed me exactly where I stand in your priorities." I paused, watching his face fall. "Was it because David walked me down the aisle instead of you? Or did you genuinely regret missing my wedding?" "Actually, don't answer that. It doesn't matter anymore. What's done is done." He sat there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. I continued, my voice softening slightly. "Having lost Mom to cancer, I understand how quickly life can change. I know there have been good times between us, and I can't completely disregard those. But I also can't ignore the bad times anymore." The resolution. "I'm willing to give you another chance to fix this," I said carefully, choosing my words with the same precision I use when negotiating hospital contracts. "But I need space right now. It might take weeks, months, or even years before I'm ready for a closer relationship. Until then, I want to maintain minimal contact. Can you accept that?" He nodded silently, then asked in a quiet voice, "Can I hug you before you go?" We embraced, and I felt the familiar mix of love and hurt that had characterized our relationship for so long. I managed to hold back my tears until I reached my car, but then they flowed freely. Tears of grief for what our relationship could have been, tears of hope for what it might become, and tears of relief for finally standing my ground. Epilogue. As I drove home to my new husband and our shared life, I realized that sometimes the strongest family bonds aren't the ones we're born with, but the ones we choose to nurture. My relationship with my father isn't over, but it's changing on my terms now. And maybe that's exactly what we both needed.